Okay, good evening everyone and welcome to Better Balaclava's first community forum. My name's Adrian Calero. I'm a local architect and acting chair for Better Balaclava. I'd like to begin acknowledging that we're meeting on the land of the Boonwurrung Bunurong people here in Melbourne and also Gadigal people, and pay our respects to them and all First Nations people across Australia. Tonight we have with us from his Sydney office, Andrew Hoyne, who is a world-renowned placemaker, branding and marketing expert, and also a local passionate business owner. He'll be talking to us about the huge potential that we have on Carlisle Street, as well as how development can benefit everyone when done properly and with the right key stakeholders engaged. We also have with us tonight Councillor Libby Buckingham from Balaclava Ward and Councillor Justin Halliday from Alma Ward, who will be giving us a brief update on the proposed sale of council land to Coles and also the up-and-coming Carlisle Street gate proposal. And as Libby has generously given her time away from a family event tonight, we'll start off with her and then we'll move on to Andrew's presentation. And then at the end, we hope to have a quick Q&A. So if you have any questions, please feel free to put them into the chat and we'll try to answer as many as we can at the end. So without any further ado, I'll hand over to Libby. Welcome, Libby.
Thank you, Adrian, and all the Better Balaclava crew for inviting me to come and give an update as to where the council's at with this important site and the Carlisle Street precinct more generally. I have prepared a quick slideshow, so we'll see if this works. Beautiful. Thank you, the organisers from Better Balaclava, for bringing us all together, and to Andy Hoyne in particular for sharing his time and his expertise focusing in on Carlisle Street. Before I dive into my quick presentation, I'd like to acknowledge that I'm meeting on the lands of the Kulin people, and I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and any elders that might be online with us today. And I acknowledge and uphold their continuing that they uphold their continuing relationship to this land. So there is a lot happening around Carlisle Street and Balaclava at the moment. As we all know, it is an incredibly vibrant place. It's diverse. We've got a history of multiculturalism and artistic. There's a real creative energy around Balaclava. On any given day, you'll see me on the street. I do love it. As much as we all love Carlisle Street and Balaclava, it is important to acknowledge that it is time for revitalisation. The strip, the shopping strip and the surrounding streets need investment, need commitment and need good planning and good design principles so that it continues for many, many more years to come to be the wonderful hub that it currently is. It's important to acknowledge that it is not only a shopping district, it is also a services hub. A lot of our community service organisations are based on Carlisle Street or around in the surrounding streets, and diverse people from all walks of life come to our area on a daily basis. It is really great that we have so many community members that are passionately committed to being part of the revitalisation of this precinct. I've spent a lot of time chatting to locals and knocking on doors in this area, and I'm constantly impressed by not only the commitment, but also the actual expertise and capacity. I think it's represented in Better Balaclava, and we're about to hear from Andy Hoyne, who, has so much experience in placemaking. So I think we're in a very optimistic place. This slide outlines a few of the major sort of projects that council's involved in at the moment, and that myself and Councillor Halliday have been working on intensively since we were elected last year. As you can see, there's a lot happening. Tonight, I'm going to focus particularly on the Coles car park and the process around that particular site, but I look forward to meeting with you again, with Better Balaclava and all residents and anyone who's online, about the other initiatives such as community safety, the urban forest, the St Kilda Library. It's a bit of a longer term project, but I'm keen to chat to you about the neighbourhood as a whole, not just this particular site, but I will focus on Coles now. So in August of last year, the former council decided to begin the statutory process to sell the laneways in the Coles car park to Coles. This was in response to long-standing interest in activating this site and the Woolworths site across the way. The key objective of the council is to enable a redevelopment that delivers community benefits and also ensures that any land sale is at or above market value. When I was elected late last year, the council paused the process so we could review the council's aims and also consult with organisations such as Better Balaclava and the Carlisle Street traders. At this point in time, the council has not made any final decisions. Councillors and council officers have met with Better Balaclava, and we have now resumed the negotiations with Coles, seeking additional benefits. This slide outlines some of the specific community benefits that the council is working to secure through the negotiations. The points on the left-hand column are things that have already been secured. The ones on the right of the screen are the ones that we are currently negotiating. The ones on the right go beyond the transaction objectives that the previous council considered, and also considers things like heritage, increased greenery, improved public and pedestrian access and laneways. I do want to stress that, and be clear, I don't want to raise expectations beyond what is realistic and achievable. We have gone back to Coles seeking further benefits, but there is no guarantee that we'll be able to secure all of these things to the extent that ideally we would like. There is a process of prioritisation, trade-offs. It is a genuine negotiation, and because it's currently underway, I'm not in a position to share more details than that, but we will be soon. So while these negotiations are happening, there are 3 concurrent pieces of work that are happening so that the council can deliver positive outcomes for this site, given some of the restrictions in place. The first is the streetscape plan, and this will be open for public consultation in May. The City of Port Phillip are updating the planning controls for the site. This is crucial as they will be considered even if this particular site goes through to state government approvals, which may be a path chosen by Coles. Finally, the council will use a legal mechanism, a Section 173 agreement, to bind certain commitments to the title of the land. A Section 173 agreement can't set a lower bar than the planning scheme. It is within these limitations that officers are negotiating with Coles to best draft a Section 173 agreement to secure the outcomes that we're after. So the council anticipates finalising the negotiations shortly, then moving into a public consultation. Councillor Halliday and I have really stressed the need for a consultation that is online through the usual have your say, but also in person and more of a conversation as well, so that we can really gather and understand all community feedback and ideas and make sure it's a genuine engagement process. So we are planning to hold a town hall meeting in late May, and we will welcome all community feedback. Further details of this town hall meeting will be advised to local residents and traders in the coming weeks. Ultimately, we will consider feedback received before the consultation, during the consultation process, before making any final decisions on the sale of land. Feedback may then continue to be factored into any further negotiations with Coles, and on the basis that it doesn't materially change the proposal that's been consulted upon. Community members will have other opportunities, as always, to speak at council meetings, particularly at when there's the report on the engagement outcomes and the final report for council decision. I hope that this information is useful to everybody. I'm just going to escape. Yeah, and come back. Stop sharing. I hope that the information I've shared is useful and a useful update as to where we're at. We'll be able to share more information in just a few weeks' time when we have the town hall meeting. I'm sorry that I have to rush out to another community event at the town hall tonight, but we've got Councillor Justin Halliday here to also answer some questions and add to what I've shared tonight. And the session is being recorded, so I'll be able to catch up on any questions you have or discussion and listen to Andy's input as well, which will be wonderful. As always, please feel free to contact me with questions or further feedback. And I'm looking forward to continuing to work with Better Balaclava and all residents and traders on this particular site and on the street generally. I do feel like this Zoom forum tonight is a really helpful step in an ongoing conversation, and I'm looking forward to coming back together in a couple of weeks' time.
Thank you, Councillor Buckingham. And so with that, we might hand over to you, Andrew.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Councillor Buckingham. That was actually really informative and in fact has answered a number of things that I was going to pose tonight. So it's extremely helpful to hear what you've been talking through then. So let me get on to it. Now, I'm just going to take you through just a bit about why I'm having this conversation with you, who it is that I believe we need to be talking to, some of the challenges that I think we face, some examples of where it's actually already being done well in Australia, the reality of this site and the things that we would like to see happen for the benefit of the community. And then finally, what's the reality? Because we can all sort of pretend that we'll get all the things we want, and we can certainly aim for the best possible outcome, but we also have to be completely realistic if we want to actually see this come to fruition and actually deliver great outcomes for the community. So by all means, let's have a wish list, but let's not die on the stake wanting to get 100% of the things that we need. We just have to know what the deal breakers are. So I lived in St Kilda for 20 years. I don't live there now. I live in Sydney. My company, Hoyne, works on projects all over Australia, Asia, and other parts of the world. And we have our office, if anyone's seen it, on the corner of Carlisle and Chapel Street. We own that building and we have other property in St Kilda. So I have vested interests personally that I want to see Carlisle Street come to life. I believe that there are a host of really concerning issues around Carlisle Street where safety or even perceived safety is concerned. And that's, you know, everything from how sort of people are confronted at night time to sort of the physical spaces that sort of exist on the street that make people feel uncomfortable. I would love to see Carlisle Street become a destinational street that people talk about as being one of the best village streets in Melbourne. I'm going to be honest. I'll wear my heart on my sleeve, as I always do, and I'll tell you what I really think. And that is that traditionally supermarkets were the worst property developers known to man. Why? Because all they cared about was just getting as many customers into their supermarket as possible. They often actually had a very detrimental effect on all the retailers around them in terms of the way that they forced developers to design these spaces. And really, residential was not a consideration for them because they didn't want to participate in any property asset class that was not grocery. Things have changed, and they've changed a lot in a relatively short amount of time. And in fact, these big grocers, particularly Coles and Woolworths, now have property teams, not just to manage retail, but property teams who manage residential and actually, strangely to some people, look to attract their competitors, fruit and veg and butchers and fishmongers, to be the tenants next door to them because they've actually discovered that it brings more customers and it ultimately makes more money, even if they're buying goods from those neighbours that they would otherwise have bought from Coles or Woolworths. So having a look at all the things that is happening with the Coles site, I'm going to tell you right up front, I'm a big supporter of this occurring. I personally believe it could be a game changer for Carlisle Street and for Balaclava, but I also recognise it could go badly. So I'm going to talk through about the good and the bad options in terms of what could occur here. I do believe that the only way that Coles will do this is if it's commercially feasible, and that doesn't mean just some groceries, some retail and some shops. It would never work. They paid $100 million for this site 2 years ago, and they'll be paying council, who knows, maybe tens of millions of dollars. I'm not sure. But we're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars of investment. They are not going to do this unless they get density, and they're not going to actually deliver all the ground plane, the public realm, and the amenity that we want as a community unless they get that density. And I think that that density will not hurt anybody. And I think that it's a really important thing that actually occurs in this location with all the public transport amenity that we have. I do think that we need to give a lot of consideration to planning and placemaking, and ideally there would be some representation to support that through this entire process. We need to ensure that there are caveats on the sale, and it was great to hear Libby talk from the point of view of council to say that is already occurring and it is already mandated in that process with Coles. So that's a fantastic outcome already. So it ensures that the sale won't occur and then somehow these things fall away, either through them selling the site to somebody else or for other reasons. Personally, I think that the Victorian State Government should make this an activity centre, but that's almost another discussion. So I really want to see Carlisle Street come back to life. And to some degree, when was it last in a great way? And I can't remember because it was so long ago. We have a big problem today in that we have all this retail vacancy, and now Coles own a lot of those vacant shops through that purchase. Now, they're only offering short-term leases, which is completely normal in any property development process. No one's going to offer a long-term lease when they're about to knock a whole bunch of things down in the next few years perhaps. But the problem is that nobody wants to invest in a retail space when they only have a short lease. So sure, you could do pop-ups and other things, but they're not really long-term sustainable retail environments. Yet it is a problem that we need to fix, because the biggest problem with village high streets that fail is that when you have vacant spaces, they create the feeling of unsafety. They create the feeling of, a place that people don't care about becomes undesirable. So it's really important we solve this short-term issue of these retail vacancies, because that is what's going to meet the needs of local residents and create safety for everybody. It does make complete sense that council does do a deal with Coles. There's nobody else that's going to buy these sort of bits and pieces of a site that Coles already owns 90% of. It makes no sense at all. And it also makes more sense that one organisation has responsibility for developing an entire master plan rather than 3 or 4 separate little developers doing it in a piecemeal way, which will never get it'll never deliver what we actually need in terms of the community. My biggest fear is not necessarily that they do a bad job, and I think we can protect against that occurring. My big fear is that they do nothing, is that in 10 years' time, we are still sitting here with nothing having occurred. And so long as people in the community understand that a city is not a museum. It's a place that constantly changes, it morphs and it evolves. It's not going to stay the same today as it was 30 or 40 years ago. That's not how cities work. It needs to change to accommodate the growth in population, the changing population, and the needs that local people have, particularly with regard to retail, amenity, and services. So NIMBYism doesn't belong here. We need to be very progressive in our thinking to ensure that the right sort of development is delivered. So why? Because we actually want this place to thrive, and to do that, we need more foot traffic. We need better shopping experiences. And I'd love to see, as much as anything, a really strong expression of the area's cultural identity. And to me, that is both the Jewish and the Eastern European community. This neighbourhood, this street could become famous Melbourne-wide. It could become the most famous street in all of Australia for its Eastern European and Jewish community, the sort of businesses, shops, services, restaurants, all those sorts of businesses could be just so incredibly dynamic, but have a very specific and particular DNA that enables us to talk about Carlisle Street as being unlike any other street. So yes, it meets the needs of locals, but it also attracts people. It actually brings people to want to come here and spend money and actually ensure that these retailers are successful. And to do that, we need the right sort of curation. We need to ensure that we're getting the right businesses that will actually fulfill that need. Thinking about the local people who live in this area, what do they need? We need to analyse what is missing, and we need to figure out how we attract those tenancies, those retailers to want to run their businesses, to take that risk of setting up a new enterprise or business on Carlisle Street. What don't we want? We don't want gambling, vape shops, porn venues, and unhealthy food. We don't want that, because it's really not great for our community. It's not how I think Carlisle Street should be presenting itself to the world. And we've got too much of that anyway. We need the support of council. They have all the power to support local business, to speed up approvals, and to collaborate with all stakeholders, from landlords to actual retailers. And what we want to do to achieve that is ensure that we are actually taking a commercial lens to this. This is not just, we don't want change. We have to accept that change is a reality. Let's just get the right sort of change. And let's do that by taking a commercial lens to this to deliver something meaningfully better than what we've got. So now, the reality is that these things all take an enormous amount of time. It's incredibly frustrating. Now, Coles and the council have been talking about this since last year. As Councillor Libby was talking about 5 minutes ago, they may get to a point that they resolve a deal in September. It could be October, November. Just to get a deal struck is going to take a year. But then the redevelopment, in terms of designing it, getting council approval, going through any kind of issues and feedback, resolving that, getting it costed with a builder. Actually, the construction is probably a 3-year process. If it happened super, super quickly, you might get it completed by 2029, but it might also be 2033. And if we don't get an outcome, well, it's none of the above. So therefore, what I'm saying is that this all happens slowly, and we need to think short term as well as long term. We need to actually think about, yes, the council has just committed to the street improvement. Fantastic. That's going to have a huge impact on the way people feel about the street. But we actually need a whole lot more that council doesn't have the control or the ability to manage, because they don't own the shops. So therefore, we do need a strategy that all the individual landlords can get on board and support as well. So we need to ensure that this change does deliver what it is that local people desperately want. Now, the reality is we've got a couple of challenges. One, really high vacancies. And again, those vacancies make the street look ugly. We've got a terrible pedestrian experience. We've got a street that looks incredibly neglected. And therefore, that undermines and lowers all the economic activity that we really want to see on this street. We've got a dirty looking street. We've got bad sort of, you see the trolleys, the rubbish, the bad street signs, the poor old sort of, public furniture. There's a real lack of street trees. That looks like there's not much maintenance being done. There's still a big presence of tagging and graffiti. Obviously all the area around Coles is a complete eyesore. And then we've got the thing that really upsets people to a whole nother level, and that is crime and perceived safety. And what I mean by perceived is it unsafe? Yeah, there are times that it is unsafe. But it's if my wife or daughter went down the street and they didn't feel safe, then it's not safe. It doesn't matter that a crime may not have occurred. People shouldn't have to feel that way. So yes, we've got CCTV cameras, but those things actually don't necessarily, they will capture people doing the wrong thing. But when you see a police presence and all those sort of security cameras, you immediately know that this place mustn't be very safe. And the reality is it's not. We have huge crime in this area, particularly property crime and drug crime, and it's far higher than the state average. So who do I think, are the key stakeholders? Who should care and who should have a voice? First and foremost, local residents, more than anyone. Secondly, retail landlords. They own the street, whether you like it or not. It's the 100 or so different landlords that own these shops that determine what happens on the street. And then the tenants, the retailers that actually operate the businesses that need to be successful within them. Of course, Coles, Woolworths, any potential or future investors, people who are buying these assets, people who are thinking about doing property development in this area, and we want more investment. Obviously, the City of Port Phillip Council, they're a key stakeholder and they hold a lot of power. Victorian State Government, all the community service providers that we have in this area who are actually supporting people in need and providing services that people desperately need and come to this area for. And ultimately, we want visitation. We want actually people visiting and coming to this neighbourhood, spending money, spending time, and telling people what a great area it is. So if we can meet the needs of all those people, we will actually have a very dynamic, engaged street. We will deliver retail success and higher tenancy values. If we can actually start this whole process by having a very clear purpose on why we're doing it, what we expect out of it, and why it will matter to people, then we can actually be really clear like a business plan in terms of how this is going to deliver meaningful experiences to all those stakeholder groups, how it first and foremost meets the needs of local people, because we don't want to have to worry so much about where you park your car. We want people coming here from a 400 and 500 metre radius. They can just walk here. That alone would create buoyancy in this area. And then these things will translate into a place brand that people know that Carlisle Street's famous for something, that we can talk about marketing in a meaningful way, and it's just not just money down the drain, because then we will have something worth saying and people will be happy to listen to it. So with local residents, they are the most important audience everywhere we go, no matter what we're doing anywhere. And in this case, in Carlisle Street, we've got some smart, socially conscious and culturally aware people, and they're very loyal to the neighbourhood. We've got people who are creative, professionals, young families, retirees, and long-term residents who really value this community, its diversity and its authenticity. And that's why they're so frustrated, because Carlisle Street no longer reflects these values of that lifestyle, which was the reason they moved here in the first place. It's totally lost its charm. It feels unsafe. It lacks quality retail and hospitality, and it does not invite people to linger longer. So we want people to come here and shop and eat and hang out. We want them to come here and make the street feel alive again, because when we've got lots of people, that creates safety. When we can actually ensure that we're actually rebuilding this unique character that this street becomes famous for. If we can actually increase that local engagement to fill the shops, we create that virtuous cycle of improvement. And that means that landlords benefit because their investment is being capitalised on. And it means that the sort of change that we want to occur is actually happening. And so, yes, it's easy to complain and be annoyed, but we actually need everyone to get on board and see what's possible in the street, how everyone can participate just by being optimistic, by actually, sharing the idea that these sorts of developments and these sort of street improvements with council can have the sort of positive impact that will actually drive the change that we want. Look, I've got to be honest, wherever I go, anywhere in the world, the toughest audience are landlords. Now, if you've got a huge shopping centre, not so much, because that one landlord controls everything, controls the experiences, the public realm, the parking, the tenancies, the retailers, you name it. But when you're in a local village high street and you've got 100 or 150 separate landlords that sometimes hate each other, that don't get along, that might have been to court with each other, there's all sorts of angst and issues that might have gone on for years or decades. So that's just the sad reality. But they also hold all the power. Individually, not so much, but collectively, their decisions on rent, property condition, and tenant mix determine whether these streets, like Carlisle Street, are successful or not. Traditionally speaking, landlords and council, and not our council, but all councils, don't get along. They don't engage, they don't collaborate, and they don't look to actually increase the value of the street experience. And I'd like to think that this could potentially change on Carlisle Street, because ultimately when you have a successful street, they are getting more rent, their asset is worth more, and they're not constantly turning over looking for a new tenant with the leasing agents out there willing to stick in any old person who will pay the rent. We don't need a street with 15 kebab shops and 9 sushi shops and 15 nail salons. That is not what Carlisle Street should be. We don't want leasing agents just getting out there banging out the quickest, easiest deal just so they've got a bum on a seat in a retail environment. We need landlords to understand that we would like to develop a street strategy and that their tenancy choices should fit within that strategy, so we are actually creating a street that is meaningful, marketable, and actually delivers local people exactly what they need, so they will keep coming back and keep shopping here. Now, councils are always in a tough position. They are constantly vilified. Everyone throws mud at councils. But the reality is they're not landlords. They have limited ability to influence things like tenant mix or retail creation, and often no ability. They are always at the pointy end of the stick, being blamed for all the problems. And while council can play a role in the success or the decline of an area, they don't have as much control as people think they do. So their budgets are often very thin. Yes, they'll try and do things like placemaking, activation, events, and marketing. I got to be honest, they very rarely make much difference. And in a street like Carlisle Street that is really sort of suffering, they almost make fuck all difference. If they did one thing every year really well, sure, that might have an impact, but it's really hard for them to actually invest in that one thing, because what if it doesn't work and they've wasted their money? So it's tough for them. What we want to see is more collaboration between council and landlords, council and retail tenants, council and local residents who want to see success. And so I think that any council who can actually solve this problem and actually sort of bring a village high street back to life, because remember, this is not a Carlisle Street problem. This is a problem all over Melbourne, all over Australia, and all over the Western world. It's everywhere. If the city of Port Phillip can actually create an outstanding solution here, they'll get famous for it. And I think that the Coles site is their opportunity to create a complete game changer for Carlisle Street. And it's not just the sale, but it's the conditions, as the councillor before me explained. And the council have got the right idea on what those conditions should be. Because I might be wrong here, but from what I understand, Woolworths built their site, and what have they done? Nothing. I thought, how exciting. Woolworths have bought the rest of their site. We'll see development. We'll see residential. We'll see some more buoyancy. We've seen nothing. We need to ensure that if this site is sold to Coles, there are guarantees on what we should expect is going to happen. And it seems like council are on the train in terms of doing that correctly, but we need a little bit more knowledge and detail in what is it that they're going to do that's going to help revitalise this struggling street. So just very briefly, I'm just going to touch on, why retail is so important. Because some people go, well, like we want services, we want amenity, we want safety. We don't really care about retail per se. We have to care about retail. Retail is the lifeblood of the town centre or the main street where people congregate. It delivers visitation. That passive surveillance delivers safety. That rental income actually ensures that there's ongoing maintenance in these buildings and they don't sort of start to dilapidate or get forgotten and fall to pieces. We want people investing in these assets so it retains a sense of beauty, which we currently do not have. And when we've got retail, we've got rhythm, we've got interest, we've got dynamism and buoyancy. So if we apply some of these placemaking principles to retail, we've got to think as much about pedestrians. Yes, people care about cars, they care about parking, but we need to think a whole lot more about walkability, comfort, and social interaction. We've got to think about layered experiences. How do we actually think about that permanent infrastructure, but also the temporary uses so we can have those events and activations? How do we think about wellness? Just in simple terms like seating and trees and spaces to actually chill out and, spaces to just congregate and meet up with a friend. How do we actually bring that local DNA to life? How do we make sure that it feels distinct, ownable, unique? It feels Eastern European. It feels Jewish. It feels like it's a part of something that is distinctly and authentically local. And then how do we think about that curation, that ongoing management, both in terms of the retail tenancies, but the whole street itself? And then, yes, architecture and built form is very important, but so is comfort and community engagement. And then finally, if we're doing all these properly, people will just keep coming back. We will actually create commercial success, but we'll create community success. So activation is a part of that because we want the place to feel magnetic. We want it to feel destinational. And some of the activation can be both permanent and temporary, and they're both really important. And the permanent activation is really about those physical things, those shop fronts, those uses, those tenancies, the landscaping, the street, and the built form. Whereas the temporary activation is about the programming, is about looking at the calendar of events, the flexible uses, the markets, the events, the festivals, those constant sort of calendar of events, of activities. They're the things that keep reminding people to keep coming back and drawing them from both local area, but also far and wide. And if we can actually think about what is it that makes our area authentic, flexible, and local, because that is the core DNA that means that we're not just like any other old sort of street, any other old local sort of retail centre with a grocer and a couple of shops. That is what creates failure. We need these layered activities, the retail, the dining, the cultural experiences, so we do create economic resilience and deeper community connection. And so how can we do that? Well, look, if we think about magnetic retail, we need to start analysing what is it that people want. Let's speak to local people. Tell us what's missing. What would you come here for? What do you need? What do you want to buy? What do you otherwise go to the Melbourne CBD for or another shopping precinct for? What can we get you on the street that will keep you here? And then how do we actually develop a strategy to ensure that we can actually bring those retailers to our street? And again, how do we amplify our DNA of the Jewish and Eastern European culture so we've got something special and we're attracting those sorts of businesses? And then if we do that, we'll have the ability to market something that people want to hear about. It's not just banging on about come to the street, but it's actually communicating something meaningful, because then we can start to support them. And if we start to look around our neighborhood at businesses such as Flavors from Syria Cafe and Space to Be, they're just off in Chapel Street. I'd love to see them on Carlisle Street. And it's not, I would never want to lose those businesses. They're great businesses and they add that extra flavor and sort of uniqueness that we want more of. But I'd love to see them in bigger businesses on the main street. And we need to figure out how do we incentivize or support landlords who might not be ready to invest or, might really be struggling as a landlord. And these are just starting points. And the sort of things that we think are really simple. Imagine if we had a great butcher and a fishmonger and a kosher general store. If we had more artisanal coffee, pastries and bakeries. We had sort of boutique and vintage clothing stores and fashion, because we really want to get that bohemian thing back and allowed too. We want more restaurants and bars. We'd like stores that sell goods and gifts and maybe pet stores and bookshops. And so we've got to think about the non-retail too, those public spaces. We want to reinvigorate that public realm. We want to think about how do we actually think differently about on-street parking? How do we create seating nooks? How do we integrate larger street trees for beautification, but also for shade? How do we think about that public realm that Coles own today, both in terms of Carlisle Street and actually out the back, to create those into perhaps a public square where events can be held and hosted? How do we think differently about community interactions to ensure that that public domain has intimate spaces as well as compelling, engaging, larger spaces? How do we have group sort of furniture outside, not just the stuff that's bolted to the ground, but the stuff that people love? They can move around, they can move those chairs, and we're not afraid of people stealing it. And then if we think about our streetscapes, if we think about, that palette that's going to actually potentially really amplify and elevate this feeling of Eastern European and Jewish community, what are those sort of physical things that will actually give us that DNA? Is it physical structure? Is it lighting? Is it street furniture? It's more about these green spaces and thinking about how we kind of really showcase distinct visual attributes that are ownable to Carlisle Street. How do we sort of highlight some of the heritage aspects of the street that already exist and actually build in more public art and actually encourage greening of the facades where possible? And then, yes, laneways are great, and we should have a whole lot more of them throughout this entire precinct, and particularly with the Coles redevelopment, if it occurs. We want to actually build that more of this kind of vibrancy to make people feel safe, to make spaces feel fun, to make them feel inviting, to actually give them all nuance, and to actually create little spaces, that these little nooks and crannies that actually feel like they're really engaging. They actually promote more use, more sort of thoroughfares, more sort of sneaky back ways to get to other streets. These are the sort of things that people Instagram, that they promote and that they talk about. So the idea of actually developing our own sort of signage program that is, unlike anywhere else in Melbourne, that actually has more public art, that amplifies different structures. And yes, public art is brilliant to have. Don't get fixated on the fact that, it should all be local people. We've only got so many talented local people, and we should be working with them and collaborating with them. Don't be afraid to bring people from elsewhere. All we want is the best possible outcome that represents what makes this place different, but it doesn't mean that we can't invite outsiders in. So let me give you a quick look at what's happening out in the market. This is Surrey Hills Village in Sydney, in the suburb of Redfern. Even though it's called Surrey Hills, it's actually not in Surrey Hills, but it's always been called Surrey Hills Village. It's been famously known for many, many decades, as long as I can remember, as Murder Mall. Every single local has called it Murder Mall. Has anyone been murdered there? I couldn't tell you, but I could tell you that nobody going into Coles would tie up their dog, because everyone's dogs get stolen. No word of a lie. They steal your dogs. Nothing that's not bolted down won't get stolen. However, from this redevelopment that Coles purchased and actually partnered with a developer, Toga, they have created one of the most dynamic new mixed-use communities in all of Sydney. There is a host of incredible apartments and townhouses. It's multi-layered. Coles has actually put themselves in the basement, not on the ground floor. Thank God. They haven't used all the valuable ground floor space. And the crazy thing I thought at the time was, directly in front of Coles, what Coles directly looks into is a huge grocery competitor called Harris Farm. All fresh food. It has half the stuff that Coles has, and yet Coles happily invited in their competitor to be a neighbour. There's bars, there's restaurants, there's retailers, there's a hotel, and it's just absolutely amazing. It hasn't been open that long. It's hugely successful, and it's become a real go-to destination for all of Sydney, and it's going to reinvigorate Surrey Hills and Crown Street. It'll have such a huge impact on how all the surrounding retailers survive and actually hopefully flourish. And it's been great for all the locals to actually have all their sort of local needs met. So I think they said at the time it was a $500 million development. So I suspect it would be quite a bit more, and that's just the number that they're using. These are the sorts of numbers that we're talking about when we say, these sorts of developments are enormous. I mean, $500 million, and it might even be closer to $1 billion. Massive commitments. But if they don't think they're going to get what they need to do to make it successful, they do nothing. And ultimately, what we want to do is see this go ahead in the right possible way. This is another one, happens to be in Sydney, in Mossman. It's a smaller development with Woolworths. I have no bias for Woolworths or Coles. I couldn't care less. What I want is an organisation who's going to actually take the right approach and deliver the right outcome. And this has been very successful in the Mossman suburb. It's actually reinvigorated an area that had some very poor buildings and sort of rundown retail tenancies. And, the locals love it, and it's got businesses upstairs and it's got resi out the back. And again, I mentioned a moment ago, flavours of Syria and space B2B. I think this is a great example of a local business and the sort of local businesses that we should be supporting. Okay, it's not Starbucks, and I don't actually think we want the sort of Starbucks that exist in the Melbourne CBD. We want these localised businesses with personality, with nuance, with connections to the local community, and, that actually have a flavour that is unique and distinct, and you won't find them anywhere else in Melbourne. And so I think it's people like these that really are ideal ambassadors for Carlisle Street. These are the sort of people we want a whole lot more of, and we've got to find a way to support them and get them on the main street, filling up these retail vacancies. So why do I keep fixating on retail vacancies? Because when you have vacancies, you have unsafe spaces. When we actually get new shops, we increase retail visitation. We actually increase the service offerings. We increase the amenity. We increase the activity. We employ local people. We train local people, and we achieve passive surveillance. Therefore, crime decreases, antisocial behaviour decreases, and in turn, the positive cycle continues to roll on. We get more visitation from locals and from people far and wide. We get more retail openings, we get more employment, and that cycle, that positive cycle continues it builds more revenue for local council in terms of rates, more engagement and impact, and it actually means less car trips because there are more people walking to use their local shops, and we don't have that reliance on requiring to get so many out-of-town suburb visitors to actually keep our local businesses busy. So the good thing is that City of Port Phillip are already talking about Section 173. They are already doing these things. This is really just a reiteration, and I wasn't clear on what council were doing before this meeting. But in terms of rezoning the land, they are looking at housing affordability percentages, public realm, community space, street activation. And I'd like to think they're going to build timelines into this so we can ensure that we're not waiting 10 or 15 years for this to occur. I think that, there should be, ideally a term about, that this should occur within a particular time frame and look, with the Section 173 that we've already just been told before I started speaking is in place, this means that we don't have this as a concern. It means that council have already made sure that if the site is sold, if the terms are broken, they have the ability to take control or to fix that. That they don't need to go to VCAT because these structures or these agreements are already going to be in place, which I'm really, really pleased to hear about. And that means that Coles did sell the site, and this happens. These organisations sometimes say all the things we want to hear, and then people change and companies change. And so if that occurs, it doesn't matter because this will be in the sale agreement from council to Coles. And so we know that even if it changed hands to a joint venture developer or another organisation, they still have to deliver on the commitments that were agreed to in the sale process. So there's some examples of where this has occurred. Darebin, for the Preston markets, ensured that they had affordable housing. It was 50% of what their expectation was. And so the volume, the quantity, and the type of housing was a commitment that they required in the sale process. Mornington Council, when they sold their site, they did a thing. They ensured that it wouldn't affect the amenity of the surrounding residential area for parking and traffic generation and commercial vehicles, litter, odour and noise. And they had a height restriction, which I don't believe should occur here. I'm sure there's a height restriction of some, but I think these sort of height restrictions of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 stories are disastrous because they actually hold us back from delivering what we need more of, which is housing and affordable housing and housing that creates more buoyancy in our high street that doesn't require people driving cars to shops because they can just walk downstairs. So, having said all that, what do I think the reality of the situation is right now? Well, partly it is that I would love to see a paid architecture design competition. I have reached out to find out if Coles have actually instigated any kind of planning or design. My understanding is that they have not. Their view is that why would we bother spending money until we know this is a done deal? We're not going to do anything until we know that this is real, which I guess makes sense. We want them to retain small tenancies in line with the rest of the street on Carlisle Street. We don't want to turn Carlisle Street into a massive Coles shop front. We want fine grain. We want to actually make sure that that character and that activation is retained, like the example I showed you in Mossman. I'd love to think that we could have a minimum of 20% affordable or key worker housing here because we desperately need it in this area. We want permeability through the laneways and the site links. We want to make sure people can get in and out and it creates a sense of engagement and joy. We want different residential typologies. For example, yes, normally these developments just have apartments, and I understand why. But like the Surrey Hills example with Coles, at the back street, they had all townhouses and they're incredibly beautiful. And they, as a different typology, and perhaps in this case at the back of this site, they would really add a really great dimension to Alfred Street. And we want to make sure that placemaking, public realm, community spaces and retail curation is an important part and consideration of whatever Coles is proposing to do on site. And it sounds like City of Port Phillip are already thinking along the same lines and they are working to get whatever they can agreed through this process. What we don't want is land banking. And for those of you who don't know what that means, it means we buy it like, I understand Woolworths bought their site and they're doing nothing with it. How long is it going to sit there for? Who knows? What we don't want is to come back in 10 or 20 years and nothing has changed. It will have the most detrimental effect on Carlisle Street that I could imagine. It will actually just make the street get worse and worse. I'd love to think that Coles can be required to actually submit a planning proposal within 2 years to make sure this thing moves ahead at a reasonable pace. I'd like to think that construction can start within 4 years. I'd like it to happen a lot sooner, but I'm trying to be realistic. And I'd like to think that Coles will provide regular updates on a website, a publicly accessible website, so we all know what's going on, so everyone can feel informed. So they've already done it well. This is an old site. Richmond Traders is a Coles site they did, I think, 9 years ago. It's considered really successful. It's got great retail. People have been really happy from what I understand in terms of what they delivered. So it's a good example to say, yes, they've done it before. This is one that Woolworths are doing in Neutral Bay. I think it's beautiful. Like, everyone's got their own taste in architecture. Let's not try and sort of be aligned on what we think is beautiful and not beautiful. But what I do think is that this is a really progressive looking solution, and it's indicative of about 10 different sites that Woolworths are working on around Australia at the moment. What it says to me is that they're investing in architecture, they're investing in public realm and open spaces, and they're investing in greening. And so as we start to look around, there are a host of examples around all parts of Australia where this is occurring. This one in Caringbah, I think, and one other one in Kangaroo Point. And this sort of, for me, bodes well, because while I was really incredibly negative about both our big duopoly grocers, Coles and Woolworths, only as recently as 5 or 10 years ago, things seem to have changed quite rapidly. And it's why, for the first time in my career, I have a sense of optimism that these sort of developments with Coles and Woolworths might finally be done better or correctly. But we can't rely on that occurring. We need to ensure that caveats are in place so we can actually ensure that these developments are going to meet community needs. So as I said earlier, I didn't realise this until long ago that Coles paid $100 million for this site. Now, I contacted Coles to speak to someone and they said, yeah, it's a disaster. We should never have bought it. We paid too much money. It's hard to make this whole site stack up. They didn't say to me, but my gut feel was it'd be easier for them to do nothing. So while I've kind of spent many years walking past this site feeling angry and annoyed at Coles, turns out I was actually being angry and annoyed at the wrong people. It's actually local families, successful, wealthy local families, that have allowed this situation to degrade to the point that it has. And they've walked away with $100 million. Good on them. But, they have let this place sit here in the worst possible condition. And I think it's really an appalling situation. But what it is now is that this is the reality. It's Coles now. They only bought it 2 years ago, so they're not to blame. The fact that it's got all these short-term retail spaces is normal for somebody who wants to redevelop something, but it's a problem that we need to solve. Let me remind you, Coles is a monster. They own 850 stores. They generate over $43 billion a year. The sales from this Coles shop represents less than 0.01% of their annual revenue. They only still have a small property team, I've discovered. So they don't, they've got, 20 or 30 projects, but they only have maybe 10 people. So they don't have enough people to do all those projects. They've got to pick them off one at a time, and they're not going to pick off the hardest ones. So they've got to figure out what to do when. And it also means that organizations like Coles, they move slow. They are absolutely unemotional. I'm emotional, and clearly you're emotional. They are not emotional. They fixate on a spreadsheet. They're profit-driven organizations. They answer to people who are shareholders. They are only going to make a decision that stacks up for them commercially. Otherwise, they'll do nothing. So they need to make sure that they're going to get approval on enough height to make the residential stack up, to make it actually viable for them to give us all the things we want on the ground plane, the public amenity. And so I know that in the media, traditionally, people have been told density is bad. I think density is good because it provides amenity, retail, and it actually enables us to get all the things we need in close proximity. For me, it's not about density, it's about proper city shaping. And what I want out of this is more quality open space. If this doesn't get resolved, if there's the wrong type of engagement, if NIMBYism plays a role, Coles will just walk away. They'll just keep the shopping centre there, just leave it as it is. Don't worry about it. They'll just do nothing. And I'm sure that's the case. We need to get a great outcome for the community, and we need the council to negotiate with Coles to get a great outcome for all of us, but ensure it stacks up for Coles so they proceed and deliver this. Because if they don't, I guarantee you, Carlisle Street is only going to get worse. And it's bad now, but it will get worse. So I guess this is a bit of my call to arms. We need to collectively bring Carlisle Street back to life. I want locals to feel they play a role in shaping the future of our high street. We all want to love where we live. We want to feel proud of our local high street, and we want to be confident that it offers everything that our families, friends, and community need. We want this street to have real potential. And some people remember that it used to have a buzz or character or charm, and others believe that it's never had that, and it's always been second rate. But regardless of what your opinion is, one thing is clear to me. Without bold investment and a shared purpose, this street will continue to decline. We need to take action now. We want this Coles redevelopment to occur, and because I think it is a once-in-a-generation opportunity to actually bring the street back to life and give people what we need in local retail. We've got stuff that most streets dream of. We've got multiple trams. We've got a train station and buses, walkability, and a rich culture. Oh my God. Think about most neighborhoods in all of Melbourne. They don't have half of that. We've got all these things that we can leverage. If we actually develop the right vision with the right local voice, we can create something vibrant, inclusive, I believe that should really bring to life this Eastern European style village with a bohemian spirit that could potentially become famous, a place that people locally have an incredible pride for, but people all want to flock and check it out. Let's back these improvements. Let's champion new development that reflects who we are. Let's support local retail businesses, and let's build a local destination that we love and that people seek out. Carlisle Street can thrive, but only if we actually collaboratively come together to make that happen. So, how do we do that? Well, that big next step is with council, but we need to be supporting the right decisions, the right feedback, not NIMBYism, but good ideas that will actually frame up what it means to create something that everybody gets benefit and value from. Right, I talked a lot. I'll stop talking now. And I'm going to hand it back to Better Balaclava. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Andrew. That was very informative and very insightful. And I think it's given us a few things to think about as a community as well, and how we engage with council and polls. We have had a couple of questions here. Some of them will be directed at Councillor Halliday, and some, Andrew, you might be able to help us with. The first one was, can Libby provide a copy of her presentation? We'll request that and see if she can. Yeah. Yep. Can everyone hear me as well? That's another, yes, yep. Awesome. Thank you. Someone else mentioned as well that 101 Collins Street bought airspace to the Birrong. Could council lease and land and airspace to Coles?
Thank you for the question. I think that, so I'm imagining here, I'm assuming that they bought the airspace so they didn't get built out in that particular case. In this case here, the train is quite far down the tracks here for us actually just selling them the land. You know, we have been, you know, I'd like to invent a time machine and go back 4 years and be elected 4 years earlier and be in a better position now, but those of us who have just been elected are working with what we have here, which is the motion that was agreed in August, and then
2024.
Yeah, August last year, and then the subsequent negotiations that have happened after that. So unfortunately, we can't go back and unwind that because the motion says we're looking at selling it to them rather than some other.
And the other point is that if you don't develop apartments or residential or even commercial above, it will not be viable. The cost of construction, the fact they spent $100 million on that land, it won't make any sense to redevelop if you can't get height on there. And the other reality, putting aside Coles' commercial or feasible reality, oh my God, we need and want more apartments in the epicenter of Balaclava. We want more residents to have accessibility to public transport and amenity and jobs. We want key worker and affordable housing for people who can't afford market housing, who actually work in the area and shouldn't have to travel but can walk to work. This sort of residential solution is something that we desperately need.
Jackson has a question, has his hand up as well.
Okay, yeah, sorry, how do I do that?
Oh, do you want to go to this one first?
Yeah, sure. Sorry, the next question was a question for council. What type of 173 and contractual restrictions are envisioned? Do they endanger the development? And does the council bear any responsibility for the lack of Woolworths development to date?
Thanks for that question. So, by the way, I will frame any question here. You know, if I'm here speaking as an individual councillor, not on behalf of every councillor. And if I am voicing my personal opinion, I will state it clearly that where I diverge. To this question, what sort of contractual restrictions are envisaged? You saw them in Libby's presentation there, but the sorts of things that we're looking at are things like open space, laneways, the bulk form, accessibility to Carlisle Street, parking, where the parking is, how much parking there is, things also like public toilets, those range of things. You can see them again in Libby's presentation. I probably don't want to list them all exhaustively here. Do you want me to tackle the second?
Yeah.
Sorry, actually, the second part of this is the real key point here. And to Andy's point, do they endanger the development? And we're kind of in a very careful position at the moment where I should also say one other thing. We are council. Libby and I represent the council. The council underneath us is the operational council. The council underneath us are doing the negotiation. We as councillors do not negotiate. We do not get involved in operational matters of delivering the services. We tell the council organisation what we want to do. We give them the parameters of what we want them to negotiate. But again, it's in that, a lot of that is in that original motion from last year. So when they're negotiating, we are trying to strike a balance between, as Andy says here, enabling the development to go ahead as quickly as possible, achieving the most community benefit we can from the sale as possible, and not frightening Coles off so that they just give up and go somewhere else and do something else because it's all too hard, and the street deteriorates for another decade, which is none of us want. Andy, I'm not sure if you want to comment on that at all before I move on.
Yeah, I agree with what you said. I think the other question that was asked, and I'm actually curious to know the answer to it as well, is what happened with Woolworths?
Okay, I'm not dodging that one. I was going to come back to it. So the sale of Woolworths happened 4.5 years ago, and unfortunately, it happened in the same sort of timing. It happened at the time of an election. There was a motion. It got sold. It got sold to Woolworths. There are penalty clauses in that contract for non-development of that site. I am not familiar with what those clauses are. You'll recall Tim Baxter mentioned those clauses at the last forum we had, the precursor to this. But obviously those clauses are not effective. Now, one of the council's larger strategy has been to use this Coles development to hopefully give Woolworths the hurry up to do their side as well, for fear of being overtaken by Coles and left behind and looking like a second-rate kind of competitor in the case where Coles has done, So
can I just clarify the question? The question is, right, not really, do you bear responsibility for not putting restrictions, like saying that the development needed to proceed at a certain pace, but do you bear, or the council staff underneath, you bear responsibility for putting too many restrictions on now in negotiating any development that has Woolworths come to you and said, we want to do this, and you've said, well, no, we don't want that. Is that been happening, or they just put nothing to you?
Sorry, can you clarify that question?
He's asking what were the restrictions that were put.
There were very few restrictions on Woolworths.
So I'm asking now, is Woolworths attempting to negotiate something, or they're just not doing anything?
If I could interrupt, they had to provide a toilet, they had to provide replacement car parking, and they had to provide, I think, a bit of housing. The restrictions were very light.
Yeah. But also there was a penalty, a financial penalty if they didn't develop within a certain time frame, and they've already expired. That time frame has expired, but it's not a severe enough penalty to be meaningful to Woolworths. Yeah. That's the problem. So what we as the community need our council in the negotiating is to have pretty tough encouragements, but also some penalties that matter and will encourage them to actually proceed and do, effectively. There are a lot of questions. We're now over time.
We are slightly, but I think Jason had a question.
Was there?
Hi there, sorry. My question is for the councillor. Andrew painted quite a compelling vision, and while we understand the balance between making it a viable option for Coles to make the purchase and providing the amenity and the features that we'd like, I'm curious as to whether, and this is a question on the council's position rather than a personal one, is there how aligned is the council with what Andrew has presented today? Are there areas where you are not aligned or differ in how you are negotiating with Coles?
Wow. So I think that council is currently okay. The local community gave through Better Balaclava and through other discussions, right, have identified a whole range of things that we want to achieve out of the sale, or things that we would like to negotiate for in the sale, and those have become the things that council officers are taking to negotiate with Coles. Andy has been talking about a whole range of things that are inside the Coles development, but also a whole range of things that are outside the Coles development, the streetscape, the revitalisation of the street. And I think I can assure you that council's focus has been much more on Carlisle Street and this area than it has been in the last 4 years at least, and probably long before that. You know,
probably decades. Yeah.
Libby and I are very focused on this area.
So Jason, Libby's presentation at the beginning outlined some of the things that council is trying to negotiate, which were very much in line with what I was suggesting or recommending. I didn't know that until an hour ago. So that gave me confidence that there is a strong alignment. Some of the contributions that Coles will be required to make in any development is not just for the money that goes on their site. They'll be required to make contributions that actually get spent on Carlisle Street off their site as well. If it's okay, I'm going to quickly answer a bunch of questions that are in the chat. I'll fly through them because if you don't mind, is that okay?
Go for it, yeah, please.
Okay, this is in no order. I'm just flicking through from sort of oh Jesus! I had this here and it just sort of moved on me. Sorry. Give me 2 secs. What could be done in the short term to kickstart some kind of community vibe in the street? That's what we are also asking council to instigate, because I mean they've said they're going to spend money on redoing all the pedestrian areas, the street furniture, the lighting. We would love to see that done, but not just kind of basic, simple, generic replacements, but something more considered and more bespoke specifically for Carlisle Street. There was another quote that someone, and you know, I'm happy for people to disagree with me, no issue at all. Andrew felt that putting a particular cultural vibe wouldn't work. It needs to be organic. Balaclava has a unique demographic, which includes Eastern and Jewish culture, but many unique cultural groups as well. We don't make a strip famous. Its cultural integrity makes it popular. I don't disagree. I'm not saying let's invent that. I agree with you, Andrew. It already has that. What I'm saying is amplify what it has. And I am not suggesting that we only have Eastern European and Jewish culture, because like the example I showed with the Syria business, I want that sort of melting pot of bohemian mixed sort of businesses. They can be from anywhere. I think it is, to your point, that we're not trying to paint a picture or overlay something that it's not real. It does have to have culture and integrity. And I believe that what we already have is that Jewish and Eastern European culture, and we've got enough of it. We just need to amplify it. We actually just need to tell people that we're doing it, and we need to attract more businesses of that ilk. People have talked a bit about safety, and I think we've covered that topic a bit. Yes, people would love a butcher and more of those sorts of businesses. And I think that, as I said earlier, I believe that Coles would be very supportive. And in fact, as far as I'm aware, those sorts of businesses, particularly fresh food and small scale butchers, are the sort of businesses that have been proven to help make Coles successful, which I would have thought meant they sold less fresh fruit and less meat. But apparently it doesn't work that way. They actually want to have those sort of businesses to actually draw more traffic to a business like Coles. Sorry, there's actually a lot more questions on this chat that I realised.
Can I just pick up that question from Lisa there? Lisa, there's a whole bunch of activity from council at the moment on the community safety strategy. We have been, we've undertaken a roundtable with police and service providers. We are redeveloping our community safety strategy. We are reinvesting in things like CCTV, for better or for worse. That's my personal opinion, for better or for worse. That's not a council opinion, for better or for worse. And we are working to ensure that we have safe spaces across all of our shopping strips, not just Ackland Street and Fitzroy Street. Not that they're...
Richard mentioned there's a strong Indian subculture. I agree. There is a strong Indian subculture in every suburb of Melbourne, and that's just the reality of how Melbourne is evolving with an Asian and Indian community, and it should be celebrated. Melissa said that, the butcher had to leave because the landlord wouldn't lower the rent. It wasn't Cole's fault. It was a greedy landlord. Well, look, to be honest, we have a bunch of really unrealistic landlords on the street who would love to command a premium price, but their tenancies just aren't worth it. And that is one of the things that pushes out really kind of strong retail businesses we'd like to see remain. And they're too cocky. The tenant leaves and they never get a replacement. And so everybody loses. So yeah, I agree with you. What we need to do is engage landlords to think commercially, but not to try and get the highest possible rent today, but to actually collaborate with tenants. And yes, as they become more successful and the street becomes more successful, they will get to increase their rent. But they need to support these sort of retail businesses for us to be able to get the street back on its legs.
Sorry, Andrew, I was just on that point. Do you see a place for council in that strategy? I think you mentioned earlier the curated retail strategy. Is there a way that they can support, landowners and traders to help get that outcome? I've been down this path before. It is very difficult because councils in general have a policy that they don't want to participate in commercial discussions where they're like, well, we're not allowed to help you get a tenant because then we didn't help them get a tenant and they're going to get upset with us, which is incredibly frustrating. But I do believe that through a number of different street initiatives that they can help the landlords attract a better quality or the right fit tenant. And even if council actually funded things like strategies, research and work that they gave to all the landlords that enabled those landlords to target those tenancies in collaboration with their leasing agents, that would definitely deliver a far superior outcome. So the council can do things strategically that will help landlords without actually giving landlords any sort of financial benefit. So the answer is yes.
So just on this point, I think, Andy, one of the connections we haven't possibly emphasised enough here is that post-pandemic, the way people shop has changed, and it's put a lot of distress on these retail strips where a lot of the things where people might have gone to their local shops, they now shop online, they shop in different ways, or they don't shop at all because we're in a cost of living crisis. So one of the key things here to make our retail space viable is more residents in the area and attracting people back from the area who now are, not encouraged, but will just make the choice to jump in their car and drive to Elstonwick or drive to Malvern or drive to Stonington instead of coming here and shopping in their local strip. And that's why the residential component here that you've been talking about is so vital for this development.
And so is when it comes to transactional retail, just buying some groceries, you can do that online. What people want is experiential retail. And that it means they want to go to a place that feels like, that's fun. There are people sitting on the sidewalk, having a coffee or a beer. There's people doing things. There are more interesting retailers that are more sort of experiential or immersive that actually make people want to go down the street because it just looks and feels fun. And it's not just about buying a widget. And so that's, and I honestly, I think those small kind of food providors are great examples of that. You know, I would far prefer to go into a beautiful deli and see magnificent food options that I could buy than just getting online from Coles. So those small space retailers really do deliver on that.
I think Justin had another question.
There's one more question here in the chat, which is about the vacant shop fronts here on Carlisle Street, and what can council do about those vacant shop fronts. I think it's 2 years ago now, council put in a new differential rates program, which means that if a retail tenancy is left empty for, I think it's 2 years, they pay more rates. If they lease it out, no problem. They pay the normal rates, but if they leave it empty with no attempt to let it, then the rates go up. And this is an attempt to push back some of this land banking that we might see, where it's not worth the landlord's effort to lease something, so that we see more of those being activated, possibly at a lower price as well, right? This sends a price signal to that retail market that we want to see shops occupied and leased rather than empty, because every empty shop, and this gets back to the safety question and the retail question, every empty shop makes it harder for the shops next to it and the other shops. And empty shops are generally where you see antisocial behaviour or homeless people, you know, who have to find somewhere to sleep. They will preferentially sleep in front of an empty shop rather than somewhere else, which is a whole housing discussion as well that we're working on. But yeah, Andy, I'm not sure if you have thoughts on that one too.
I ran the Big Issue magazine Australia-wide for 7 years. And I can tell you now, because I've done a lot of work in homelessness, people gravitate to sleeping or hanging out where there are empty stores. They're a magnet for it. The more you have retail vacancy, the more you have people actually using those spaces to sleep, hang out, or even, you know, do drug transactions. So filling those vacant stores with anything is good for the street. And at the moment where the entry to Coles is, you know, back in the olden days when there was a Commonwealth Bank there and there was a, you know, fruit shop, you know, it was a whole different experience. And if ideally through this negotiation between council and Coles, knowing that even if the deal gets done in 6 months, they're going to have to design it, get it approved. It is not going to start construction for years. We shouldn't have to live with these eyesore vacancies for years. I would like to think that council, in part of their negotiation, will get Coles to commit to both beautifying and figuring out a short term. And when I say short term, I say a 3-year solution to tenant those spaces at, you know, peppercorn rents to fill them up with really interesting businesses. And they have to be peppercorn rents because no one is going to go and spend a bunch of their own personal money to fit out a whole retail space knowing they've got to leave in 3 years. It's just not realistically viable. But if Coles can give them a peppercorn rent, yeah, sure. They can rationalise that investment for a shorter period of time.
Okay, I think we've got time for one more question.
About heights.
Oh yeah, there was a question about heights. What are the existing height limits at the moment? Let me just go back. I think it might be for you.
Okay.
What are the current height restrictions, and would it go higher uplift if affordable housing was included, or essential worker housing? And someone else said, "Are we ready for 15 stories?"
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for the 15 to 20 stories suggestion. That I'm not sure where.
I'll tell you where the 15 stories came from. It's the Victorian State Government Activity Centre initiative. So they're doing these all over Melbourne. Anywhere near a train station gets 15 stories.
So we are unusually one of the only inner city councils with a train station not to get nominated as an activity centre here in Balaclava. We, as a council, we don't know why we weren't nominated. Windsor got nominated, Elsternwick got nominated, Ripponlea and Balaclava here missed out. No idea why. So we're not in the activity centre land, which is where you see a lot of those rule changes happen around planning. So what we are working with here is our current planning kind of regime that we have in the area. To your question, which I'm sure you probably know the answer to better than I do, the current structure plan sets a height limit here of about 5 or 6 stories.
Yeah, it's
We're
5 or
here
6.
on Carlisle Street, right next to the police station. Over the road, we have 5 or 6 stories.
Yep.
We are seeing more and more developments come in at that height, not exactly here, but in this area, around 6 stories. However, that structure plan is very old. One of the things that council is you would have seen Libby's presentation there. One of the things that was embedded in that was another step here. We've got the section 173 that we're negotiating, and that has specific agreements that are tied to the land and the sale. The other thing that we're seeing is the streetscape side of stuff, which we're working on. The third element there was what are called site-specific controls. We don't have time to develop a whole new structure plan for Carlisle Street. I wish we had done it 4 years ago, and I wish it was in place now. But what we can do in the time we have is develop what are called site-specific controls, which is like a mini structure plan for this one site, bounded by the 4 streets around it. And there's still a risk that Coles, when they buy the land, that they go to the minister. They say, this is a state significant project. We want you to look at this instead of the council and be the planning authority for it. But that site-specific plan or site-specific controls that we might put in place or have in development will still have some standing, even if it goes to the minister, and can inform the minister and the department's decision-making on the development. And that's where we'll probably get into things like height, things like overshadowing, things like the built form, and those areas there, where it's harder to negotiate that through the 173. It's easier to negotiate that to limit control, direct that in a planning mechanism.
If I could just add to that, thank you, Justin. I am familiar with the urban design program very well. So 2009 and updated in 2011, there's some significant elements of that urban design framework which are really important. One is protecting the solar access to the pavement on the southern side of Carlisle Street. Some various other must statements in the UDF which are really important to be there and should be protected. And I suggest that you all go to the website, St Kilda website, and have a look at the UDF. It was a really great piece of work. It's still very current in many ways, in many regards. And so we shouldn't lose those in any refresh, as the government like to use, process. So there's some significant work done back in that time.
I think that concludes the evening. Thank you, Andrew, for presenting. Thank you, Justin and Libby, who isn't here, for coming along.
And thank you to everybody for participating. We've had about 60 people turn up tonight. Really appreciate it. We've got a strong community, and with all of us contributing, we'll get somewhere.
And a special thank you to Andrew's team here in Melbourne, who've supported us all night.
They've stayed late for us as well.
Thanks, everybody. You know what? We're only going to create a better community together if we give a shit. And if we are thinking about the future, not just us, our kids, future generations, to make something that is safe, interesting, and has its own unique personality. And I think if everyone's on board with that, we can actually see really positive change occur here.
Yeah. And just a reminder as well that we will be having a forum in May at the town hall, as Libby kind of touched on earlier as well. But
if people are particularly interested, do you make sure that you put your details through on info@ Better Balaclava?
Yeah, and so the other thing I was going to say, if you haven't already, please follow us on Facebook and our website, betterbalaclava.org.
And we'd love some of your talent. If you've got some time and talent, we'd love it.
Thank you. Thank you very much, everyone.
Yeah. Thanks very much.
Thanks.
That concludes.